Hello and welcome to the public meeting in preparation for the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, also known as CITES CoP20. My name is Brianna Law. I'm a 2025 Canals Marine Policy Fellow, and I serve as the Congressional and Legislative Affairs Fellow for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I will be one of the moderators for this event, and before we get started, I'm just going to go over the order of events for this afternoon. So first, we're going to hear some opening remarks from our director, who I will introduce in a moment. Next, we'll go over ground rules and logistics for giving public comments, and then we will open the floor for the input session. And then we'll close with some brief closing remarks. Thank you all for being here this afternoon, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Head of Delegation to CITES CoP20, Brian Nesvik.
Well, good afternoon. I'm pleased to welcome you to this public meeting in preparation for the 20th meeting of the Conference of Parties to the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wildlife, Fauna, and Flora, or CITES, as most of us know, CITES CoP20. As you know, CITES CoP20 is scheduled to take place in Samarkand, Uzbekistan from November 24th to December 5th. I'd like to express my thanks to Uzbekistan for hosting the COP20, which is also the first CITES COP to take place in Central Asia. This is an important year for CITES. Aside from it being a COP year, 2025 marks the 50th anniversary of the implementing of the convention. CITES has had a profound impact in ensuring international trade in listed plants and animals is legal, biologically sustainable, and traceable. Over the last 50 years, CITES has helped Americans and people around the world benefit from trade in wild plants and animals while ensuring this trade doesn't threaten the survival of the species in the wild. The voices of our stakeholders are pivotal in helping us shape our positions as we prepare for COP20, and I appreciate your participation here today. This public meeting follows our third Federal Register notice on the development of the U.S. negotiating positions for COP20. I encourage those providing comments today to also submit your comments in writing to the Federal Register during the public meeting comment period, which ends on Wednesday, September 17th, which is just a week from today. We are committed to transparency in our CITES COP20 preparations, and we're committed to providing ample opportunity for public input into our decision-making processes. Among our many important stakeholders, we look forward to engaging with industry groups to understand more fully how trade in wildlife or in wild plants and animals occurs into and out of the United States and any implications of changes to the CITES appendices. Before we open the session for comments on other parties' submissions, I'd like to briefly outline the U.S. submissions to COP20. The United States submitted or co-sponsored 4 proposals to amend Appendices 1 and 2 and 4 discussion documents. First, I'll go over the proposals to amend the CITES appendices or species proposals. We propose to amend annotation number 3 to exempt thin-sliced roots of artificially propagated American ginseng from CITES provisions. We also co-sponsored proposals to move the Guadalupe fur seal and the peregrine falcon to appendices or to Appendix 2 from Appendix 1. The implementation of CITES coupled with various international efforts has allowed these species to recover to the point where they can be transferred from Appendix 1 to Appendix 2. Lastly, we propose to remove the Caribbean monk seal from the list of appendices. Sadly, this species has gone extinct with no sightings since 1952, more than 2 decades before CITES was established. In addition to the species proposals, we submitted 4 discussion documents. We seek to improve implementation of the convention and reduce clearance delays for CITES specimens with long transit times such as timber by amending existing resolutions to expressly allow parties to issue pre-convention certificates and retrospective CITES documents during those periods of transition following the COP. We proposed decisions to increase support of CITES enforcement by establishing a voluntary register of rescue centers for confiscated live CITES listed animals and plants, and amending a resolution to encourage funding for the transport and care of these specimens post-confiscation. We suggested the CITES Secretariat convene a global workshop to discuss the management of sea cucumbers and efforts to combat sea cucumber trafficking, which is a continuing conservation and national security threat, as cucumber trafficking has linkages to transnational organized crime syndicates. And lastly, we propose that the CITES Animals Committee and Standing Committee review and provide guidance for the consistent application of the source code R for ranching for aquatic species. This guidance would close potential loopholes exploited by other parties and prevent U.S. businesses engaging in legal, biologically sustainable trade in aquatic species from being undermined and outcompeted in global markets. Now that you've heard about our submissions, I look forward to hearing your comments on what other CITES parties have proposed. I assure you that we will consider all verbal and written comments we receive during this meeting and the open comment period as we prepare our U.S. negotiating positions. I will now turn to our moderators to outline how the meeting will run and introduce the heads of our management and scientific authorities. Thank you again for being here today and for your participation in this very important event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Director Nesvik, and welcome everybody. My name is Heidi Ruffler. I work in the International Affairs Program of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Before we get into your comments, we'd like to go over some ground rules. One is that this entire meeting will be recorded and will be posted to our website. The link is on the screens, but it is quite small. If you just go to any browser and type in FWS and then COP20, you should be able to find the page pretty quickly. That's our landing page for COP20. So that's the easiest way to find it. We do ask that you today wear your event badge at all times. Other logistics, I've been told that the bathroom in the back of this room is actually out of commission right now, but we do have bathrooms if you head to the back and then take a right, go through the turnstiles. The men's bathroom is right on the right, and the ladies' bathroom is on the left, so please feel free to get up and come and go as you need. Other logistics too, if we'd ask people to please keep their cell phones silenced, and as well to stay on topic today. So we are very excited to hear a range of different comments today. And as the director said, all of them are very important and will be taken into consideration. We want to be mindful that we have enough time for everyone. So we'll ask you to, we don't have a strict time limit, but if you go on maybe beyond 10 minutes, I might ask you to please wrap up and so we can move along, and you can always come back at the very end and provide more comments. We also, you can go to the next slide, please, Brianna. We're going to give the comments in the order of today's sign-in at the front desk. So if you were decided that you will make comments, then you should have had your name recorded there. So we'll be calling people up. When your name and organization are called, please come to this standing mic here in the front, and you can face the panel and provide your comments. This is a listening session, so there will not be any responses today from our panelists. There will also be an option if you were undecided on providing comments, or if you are suddenly inspired to provide some today, you're welcome to do so at the end. In that case, we'll just ask people to sort of line up by the mic, and then before they get started, to clearly state their name and organization before they start. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the other two people on the panel here on either side of our director. Ms. Naima Aziz is the head of the Division of Management Authority, and Dr. Thomas Leuteritz is the head of the Division of Scientific Authority. And then our last slide is just some information. Again, as the director said, we'd love for you to also submit any verbal comments in writing. The easiest way to do so is to do so at regulations.gov, and you can see the information here on the screen. You can take a screenshot if you'd like. You can also send them in by U.S. mail, but I will say that we need to receive everything before September 17th in order for the comments to be considered. We're going to leave this slide up in case you'd like to capture this information later. Thank you again for coming today, and we will start the public comment period, so thank you. If there are any questions about logistics, I'm happy to take that. Yes?
Will there be an opportunity to ask any simple questions, or is that in the comment?
It's really not. I mean, you can ask questions, but we will not be answering any substantive questions today. This is a listening session only, but you're welcome to state them and to put them into the written record as well. Thank you.
So,
Any other
thank you,
questions?
Heidi. Oh, sorry. Is there another question?
I don't see any other questions.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
I guess we'll. Thank you so much.
We're going to start with Caitlin Starks from Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission.
Thank you. Let me know if this is too quiet. My name is Caitlin Starks, and I'm going to be providing comments on behalf of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission regarding the proposal to list American eel, Anguilla rostrata, to CITES Appendix 2, which will be considered at the COP this year. The Commission will also be submitting written comments expanding on the points raised here. The Commission is the management authority for American eel under the Interstate Fishery Management Plan, or FMP, for American eel and its 7 addenda. All 15 Atlantic coastal states, as well as the Potomac River Fisheries Commission and the District of Columbia, are included in the management unit for American eel, and they've implemented the required elements of the FMP. And in addition, Fish and Wildlife Service is a voting member of the American Eel Management Board, and a U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologist serves on the Technical Committee for American Eel, which provides scientific advice to our management board. At this time, the Commission does not support an Appendix 2 listing for American eel because they believe it would not provide additional conservation benefits for eel and could have detrimental impacts on the valuable eel fisheries along the Atlantic coast, particularly for the Maine Elver fishery. The combination of fishery management measures, monitoring, and enforcement programs that have been implemented for American eel in the majority of its fished range limit the risk of overharvesting for any market, including international exports, and provide adequate protection for the species such that an CITES Appendix 2 listing is not necessary. And as an alternative to an Appendix 2 listing, the Commission strongly supports the adoption of the draft resolution on trade, conservation, and management of anguillid eel species that will be considered at the COP20 meeting. The draft resolution is a more appropriate approach to enhancing international collaboration around the conservation of American eel and other anguillid eel species that would allow the range states to strengthen the science, management, and enforcement, as well as communication pertaining to trade in American eel while still maintaining economically and culturally important fisheries. The Commission's management program for eel includes measures to control commercial and recreational fishing mortality for eel of all life stages in response to our stock assessment findings and concerns for the resource. Only Maine and South Carolina allow harvest of the glass eel life stage in the United States. South Carolina harvests less than 250 pounds annually, and Maine's annual quota is 9,688 pounds. Since 2019, Maine has also been allotted 200 pounds of additional quota for domestic aquaculture. For yellow eel fisheries, there's a coastwide quota, a 9-inch minimum size limit for recreational and commercial fisheries, a minimum mesh size requirement for eel pots, and daily recreational bag limits and bait limits for a party and charter boat captain and crew. Mature silver eels are protected by a prohibition on take of eel from any gear type other than baited traps or pots or spears from September 1st to December 31st as they migrate out to the ocean to spawn, except for 9 permit holders only in the Delaware River weir fishery. And to further reduce fishing pressure, the annual yellow eel quota was reduced almost by half to 518,000 pounds in 2024. The Maine Elver quota has never been exceeded, and the coastwide yellow eel quota has not been exceeded in 7 years. The states are also required by the Fishery Management Plan to collect fishery-dependent and independent data, which are essential to our coastwide stock assessment for American eel. These include required trip-level reporting of commercial landings and dealer transaction reporting, required annual young-of-year surveys to monitor annual recruitment in all of the states, and some states also conduct surveys of the yellow eel life stage. To address undocumented international trade, the Commission has collaborated with its law enforcement committee and the state of Maine to implement effective monitoring and enforcement for the high-demand glass eel fishery. Specifically, Maine has an electronic tracking program that creates complete traceability of glass eels from the harvester to dealer to export, and it significantly limits the possibility of illegal harvest and export of glass eels. Maine has also implemented a penalty system, including fines, jail time, and license revocations for glass eel offenses, and has seen the number of infractions fall over the last decade from over 200 to less than 10 per year. Improved monitoring requirements for yellow and silver eel fisheries have also been implemented in the other Atlantic coastal states, and state enforcement officers monitor tributaries in person and with the use of remote sensing equipment, and have seen very little illegal activity in the last several years. The Commission is particularly concerned that an Appendix 2 listing would have adverse impacts on Atlantic eel fisheries due to the timelines and processes for obtaining the required export permits and the legal acquisition findings, or LAFs. To our knowledge, in recent cases, it's taken a year or more for Fish and Wildlife to issue LAFs for species listed under CITES. And if this were the case for eel, it would be a severe detriment to the fishery, and for live or glass or yellow eel shipments, any delays in the export process could result in mortality and large losses of revenue. So given the importance of the glass eel fishery, which was worth almost $20 million in 2023, this is a significant concern. Additionally, the Commission is concerned about the unintended consequences that an Appendix 2 listing could have. For example, if a listing were to reduce the supply of legal eel products from sustainable fisheries, that demand could then potentially be met by increases in illegal or unmonitored harvest in other regions, which is a major concern that was raised in the recent FAO Expert Advisory Panel report published last month. That Expert Advisory Panel report from the FAO also concluded that American eel does not meet the criteria for a CITES Appendix 2 listing based on a lack of evidence that regulating international trade is necessary to ensure fisheries harvest does not endanger the wild population. The Commission agrees with this conclusion, which is also supported by the determinations of Fish and Wildlife Service in 2007 and 2015 that American eel has a stable population, and listing under the Endangered Species Act was not warranted. The FAO report also indicates that because the American eel is a panmictic species without subpopulations or barriers to gene flow, it's likely resilient to exploitation by fisheries, which are only occurring in a small portion of its total range. Glass eels also experience high levels of natural mortality and density-dependent mortality, and therefore fishing pressure on that life stage has a lower effect on the population than exploitation on older eels. Lastly, the EU is proposing to list all species of anguillid eels under Appendix 2 based on the premise that eel are indistinguishable at their early life stages. However, according to the FAO expert panel report, there are reliable diagnostic characteristics that can be used to accurately differentiate glass eels among anguillid species, and those are routinely used in Japan and the Philippines. So in closing, while the Commission does not support a CITES 2 appendix listing, the Commission and its member states do support the draft resolution on trade, and will continue efforts to conserve American eel through regular stock assessments, habitat restoration, monitoring, harvest, and improving river passage for migrating eels. Thank you for considering the Commission's comments.
Thank you, Caitlin. Next, we will have Mitchell Feigenbaum from the Marine Eel Trade and Aquaculture and Delaware Valley Fish Co. And after Mitchell, we'll have David Garcia from the U.S. Association of Reptile Keepers and Arthur Parola from the National Animal Interest Alliance. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Hi, my name is Mitchell Feigenbaum, and I wish to thank the service for hosting today's session. I'm pleased to speak after Caitlin also on the topic of the proposed American eel listing under CITES. And I'll start by saying I wear several hats in connection with the American eel fishery. I help lead 3 companies in the United States and Canada that have been the top exporters of adult eels for more than 50 years and of baby eels for over 20 years. I am the board chairman of a company called Nova Eel, an aquaculture venture backed by shareholders who have participated in the eel fishery for decades in Maine, Pennsylvania, and eastern Canada. I've chaired the ASMFC advisory panel for American eel twice, and served on that panel for over 20 years. I've been a peer reviewer for Canadian and international scientific reviews for American eel, including one conducted by the IUCN. I have contributed data for 2 Endangered Species Act reviews by the service, and I've regularly provided intelligence on illegal eel trafficking to federal and state agencies. Nova Eel seeks to transform the American eel capture fishery, which is worth $25 to $50 million annually in 2 countries, into an aquaculture and processing industry that could be worth upwards of $500 million per year if all the baby eels captured in North America legally were farmed here instead of mainland China. China maintains unfair advantages in this industry that can only be addressed by decisive leadership of our government. The Office of Minor Use and Minor Species of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has supported our company with close to $1 million in grants to support our application for an investigative new animal drug, which is necessary to compete with Chinese eel farmers who use pharmaceutical-based growth enhancement without regulation or oversight. Nova Eel's application was initiated with substantial input from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through what's called the Aquatic Animal Drug Approval Partnership that it has in combination with the FDA. The CITES Appendix 2 listing proposal for American eel is of great importance to all the fishery stakeholders. In my opinion, it is important that the U.S. government analyze the proposed CITES 2 listing with a distinct view of each of the 2 criterion proposed by its proponents. Taking this approach, and based on an overwhelming weight of evidence, the administration should not merely oppose, but should actively lobby other member states to reject the proposed listing of the American eel under the first criterion, which is that the listing must be necessary to keep the species from becoming endangered or threatened in the near future. The CITES proposal is inappropriate because it would conflict directly with 2 successive findings of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that the American eel is neither endangered nor threatened either species-wide or in any significant portion of its range. Clearly, the CITES proposal is an extension of long-standing efforts by the IUCN, as well as the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, called COSIWIC, their efforts to use the international forums to enhance their view of species status and to undermine the service's finding. With all due respect, the conflicting positions between the Fish and Wildlife Service and the volunteer-authored findings of IUCN and COSIWIC cannot be brushed aside by suggestions that they are based on different metrics, different standards, or regulatory requirements. The service's 2015 finding is replete with language that expressly repudiates the logic and findings of COSIWIC and IUCN. The level of analysis and the degree of objectivity of the Fish and Wildlife Service in their 2 successive reports resulted in a document that is seriously worth defending in an international forum. Now, as mentioned, the second criteria for the proposed listing, the look-alike concerns, it deserves a second analysis. And while the proposal is likely to be opposed by the industry and the administration for good reasons, it raises important questions. Simply put, the American glass eel is a look-alike species to other glass eel species, and this is exploited by international smugglers to mask illegal conduct. Hong Kong's customs statistics show that in 2022, it imported 157 tons of live American glass eels from the 4 leading range state producers. Yet, the total lawful quota from these 4 countries is less than 25 tons. This extreme disparity demonstrates that the illegal harvest of glass eels in North America is rampant and/or that wildlife smugglers are using false records to hide their vast illegal trade in the CITES 2 listed European eel by mislabeling them as rostrata. The illegal trade in glass eels worldwide is another one of the dramatic, unfair advantages that allow our Chinese competitors to thoroughly dominate the global trade of our domestic species. The illegal trade destroys the credibility of our trade statistics. It paints a false picture of fishing pressure on American eel that chokes efforts of the lawful fishery participants to develop an industry that can compete globally. The illegal trade also promotes tax evasion, money laundering, provides leverage to organized criminals, implicates national security interests, just like the sea cucumber that I learned about earlier, and it undermines people's faith in government. To be clear, I offer no opinion as to whether a CITES 2 designation for the European eel, Anguilla, is credible and therefore a proper basis for listing any other species under the look-alike category. I also defer to the expertise of the ASMFC and the Fish and Wildlife Service as to whether an Appendix 2 look-alike listing could be administered effectively under the international regime, or whether combating illegal trade will be more effective through unilateral or binational efforts. Either way, the current CITES proposal should be a wake-up call to all range states for Anguilla rostrata. My closing message to the Fish and Wildlife Service, respectfully, is that enhanced traceability systems, greater resources for law enforcement, and closer cooperation between all trading partners are necessary to a stable fishery and to take advantage of the remarkable economic potential of this resource. Thank you, Director Nesvik and other officials that are hosting today's meeting. I'm grateful for a chance to offer these comments. I am available to any officials in the service that are interested in examining any of these points further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitchell. Next, we will have David Garcia, followed by Arthur Parola, and after that, Rebecca Regenery from Species Survival Network.
Good morning. My name is David Garcia. I'm the legal counsel for USARC, the U.S. Association of Reptile Keepers. USARC requests that the U.S. oppose the listed proposals for the Hispaniolan gallywasp, Carabicus warrenii, the Mount Elliott leaf-tailed gecko, Phylurus aminicola, the ringed thin-tailed gecko, Phylurus caunulatus, the genus listings for Crotalus and Cecistris, and the Holmes hingeback turtle, Cynixis homenii. These proposals are factually and logically flawed and don't warrant support from the United States government. The Appendix 1 listing, the proposed Appendix 1 listing for the Hispaniolan gallywasp alleges that all the specimens in trade are illegally sourced, since the Dominican Republic has not authorized the export of this species. Yet the listing proposal acknowledges that legal trade has been reported for 30 years from Haiti, a non-party to the convention. There is no attempt to reconcile this factual issue in the proposal. Furthermore, the prices cited in the proposal are all less than $250, showing that this is not a species that is in high demand. The U.S. should not indulge this poorly drafted proposal from the Dominican Republic. As to the two species of Phylurus proposed by Australia, the proposal ignores that the trade in these species is in captive bred specimens and that geckos are generally bred, are well represented in the captive trade of the captive pet trade. Australia also acknowledges that legal export of these species has occurred. Australia's proposal, however, fails to factually demonstrate that the trade, therefore fails to factually demonstrate that the trade in these species is in illegal specimens. The service is reminded that the U.S. has a strong respect for property rights, and countries like Australia should be discouraged from making baseless claims, such as those in these proposals, in an attempt to undermine the property rights of our citizens. Once an animal has been exported from a country of endemic origin, that country has no right over the specimens. It is our citizens' rights to their property that should dominate. The proposal by Mexico and Bolivia to list the entire genuses of rattlesnakes are an extreme overreach and should also be opposed. First, we must acknowledge that they accuse the U.S. of willfully trading in Mexican endemic species without any evidence that the Mexican government has failed to export those species in the past. The U.S. should not accept those baseless claims by the Mexican state. Furthermore, the reported trade values are minuscule. We believe that these proposals are unwarranted and may be better handled through other mechanisms of CITES. Likewise, with Conyxis homenii, the proposal says that they are being ranched and captive bred, yet assumes that trade is not, that those are not correct designations. That is also better handled through CITES trade mechanisms to review that trade. And finally, we are seriously concerned with document 73, Trade in Endemic Species. We are seriously concerned about this document because it allows states to undermine the property rights of U.S. citizens through baseless claims that their species have not been legally exported. This doc needs to be reworked to require robust evidence before we take any of these claims by countries of endemic origin seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Arthur Parola from the National Animal Interest Alliance, followed by Rebecca Regnery from Species Survival Network, and Catherine Miller from Four Paws USA.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for listening to our comments. My name is Arthur Parola, and my comment is on behalf of the Animal Interest Alliance. We also echo the comment of United States Association of Reptile Keepers. This comment is also in regard to Prop 19, the proposal for Carabicus warreni, the Hispaniolan giant gollywasp. In the proposal submitted by the Dominican Republic, the claim is made that all specimens in international trade were illegally acquired. However, the proposal also states that Haiti legally exported the species at least through the 1990s. These two statements are incompatible with one another. Clearly, all specimens in international trade are not illegal. This highlights a growing problem with a number of such claims of illegality growing, often with little evidence other than the absence of such records from decades ago when no records were kept. As such, the U.S. and CITES Secretariat should be skeptical of such claims. We request that the Fish and Wildlife Service oppose the proposal and any other proposal with factual inconsistencies or lack of records or data as the basis of the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Rebecca Regnery from Species Survival Network, followed by Catherine Miller from Four Paws USA, and Drew Robertson from Humane World Action Fund.
Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Regnery, and I am speaking on behalf of the Species Survival Network, which is a coalition of over 80 NGOs, which also means that I have a lot of comments. I'll try to go through them quickly. First, I'd like to speak about the shark and ray proposals. The latest science shows that 37% of shark and ray species are threatened with extinction, and that around 70% of species present in the international fin trade are threatened. Pelagic shark populations have declined by more than 50% in about 50 years, and reef shark populations are now functionally extinct on nearly 20% of surveyed reefs. International trade in fins, gill plates, liver oil, and meat remains a major driver of these declines. The shark and ray proposals that have been submitted for consideration at COP20 list the most threatened species in Appendix 1, apply a zero export quota to critically endangered species, and regulate products in trade that are not yet covered by CITES through Appendix 2 listings. They would require, if adopted, they would require action whenever trade may increase the risk of extinction of already threatened species. So we ask that the U.S. please support these proposals. My next comment is on behalf of one of our members, the Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance, or PASA, on Proposal 12, the proposal to transfer the golden-bellied mangabe from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1, which was submitted by the Democratic Republic of Congo. We ask that the U.S. supports this proposal. The species is listed among the world's 25 most endangered primates and is endemic to the DRC. Wild-caught mangabeys are regularly seen for sale in markets in the DRC and for exports. International trade is relatively new and has skyrocketed in 2018 to 2019. The DRC reported exports of 120 live individuals between 2018 and 2022. Among 25 monkeys seized by Zimbabwe in 2022 on their way to South Africa, 11 of which were golden-bellied mangabeys. The proposal does not include 2024 exports yet, including those going to the Vantara Zoo located in India. An Appendix 1 listing would help ensure that this extremely rare species is not exploited commercially and that all trade is limited to non-commercial trade. My next one, I'm sorry, I do have a lot, so if you need to cut me off, let me know, but I'm going to keep going. We ask that the U.S. support Proposal 25 by Mexico and Bolivia to include the 2 genera of rattlesnakes in Appendix 2. The vast majority of these species occur in Mexico, where most of them are endemic. The Environmental Ministry of Mexico determined in 2019 that 19 of these species are endangered, 17 are threatened, and a total of 42 Mexican rattlesnake species are at risk. 93% of the trade is wild caught, 99% is in parts and derivatives, and the latter cannot be identified to species level. And I just got back from a meeting in Panama where I met with some of the Latin American countries. They are all supportive of this proposal. Next, I'd like to cover the eel proposal, which we've already heard about. We ask that the U.S. support this proposal by the EU, Honduras, and Panama. Historically, the Japanese eel was the primary species supplying East Asian eel farms, but declines in that species led to increased use of other species, particularly for farms in China. Currently, only the European eel is listed on CITES. This causes difficulty in identifying species of glass eels in many parts of the world, which masks illegal trade. This listing would harmonize international legislation and facilitate enforcement. And making more enemies in the room, I am going to next talk about Proposal 46, Brazilwood. We ask that the U.S. support this proposal by Brazil to transfer Brazilwood from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. This species, which is endemic and endangered, is illegally exported to the USA, Europe, and Asia for the musical instrument bow industry. Finished products were exempt from CITES permits until February 2023, allowing for trade without any controls to ensure that the trade is sustainable. An Appendix 1 listing would reduce pressure on remaining native populations. And just a couple more, I promise. Document 73 on trade in endemic species. We ask that you support the recommendations and the draft decisions in this document submitted by Brazil and Ecuador, which advocate for mandatory prior consultation with countries of origin and enhanced verification procedures under CITES to help prevent trafficking, particularly for species that are both endemic and critically endangered. And I believe, no, I have 2 more. My second to last one is also on behalf of PASA, the Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance, to support document 78.2 by Uganda, which proposes to establish a CITES enforcement task to tackle ongoing wildlife crime involving live great apes. The U.S. has spoken in support of a similar document at recent standing committee meetings, so we ask that you do so and support this one again. All great apes are listed on CITES Appendix 1, but live great apes continue to be trafficked internationally. The proposed task force would include not only range states, but also transit and consumer states, providing a holistic approach to reduce poaching and trafficking. And finally, document 102 on lookalike species. We have concerns about this document submitted by the United Kingdom and its potential future ramifications for Appendix 2 listings and enforcement of those listings. We suggest that if the UK has concerns about the application of the lookalike provision, perhaps a better way forward would be recommending the development of guidelines on what identification information parties might consider including in proposals that involve lookalike listings. As it stands in the current document as drafted, with a focus on case studies, we are concerned that it could call into question certain listings, particularly higher taxon listings, based on standards other than those that are included in ResConf 9.24. Thank you so much for your attention and for giving me so much time, and I will see you in Samarkand.
Thank you for your comments and for keeping it under 10 minutes. We appreciate it. Next is Catherine Miller from 4Paws USA. Then we'll have Drew Robertson from Humane World Action Fund. And after will be Robert Likens from Pet Advocacy Network.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Director Nesvik, Ms. Aziz, and Dr. Luderitz for this opportunity for public comment. My name is Catherine Miller, and I'm the U.S. Director for 4Paws International, the animal welfare organization for animals under direct human influence. My comment relates to Agenda Item 55 on purpose transaction codes, specifically Code Z for zoos. 4Paws has been involved in the rescue, transport, care, and rehoming of hundreds of CITES-listed big cats, including providing lifetime species-appropriate care in our own sanctuaries. And we do also collaborate with accredited zoos in this work. We see the impacts of illegal trade, commercial exploitation, and substandard private keeping on these animals. We respect CITES as a vital mechanism for ensuring that trade does not threaten the viability of species and that any legal trade is conducted in accordance with COP decisions, which is why we are concerned that CITES Purpose Code Z is increasingly being misused to legitimize commercial trade in endangered species, undermining the integrity of the CITES permitting system and global conservation objectives. Recent investigations by 4Paws reveal that this code is being used to facilitate the commercial trade of Appendix 1 listed species under the false pretext of conservation or zoo trade. The unprecedented case of Green Zoological Research and Rehabilitation Center, GZRRC, also known as Vantara, which had imported at least 39,000 wild animals by the end of 2024, and a minimum of 542 big cats from 7 species of significant conservation concern, including tigers, leopards, jaguars, pumas, cheetahs, snow leopards, and clouded leopards, and lions, 96% of which sourced from South Africa, Mexico, and United Arab Emirates, illustrates how Purpose Code Z is misused and demonstrates why urgent clarification of the code is needed. So we urge the U.S. delegation to support the inclusion of Purpose of Transaction Code Z as a priority under paragraph B of the draft decision to replace Decision 19.149 at COP20. This will ensure that the intersessional working group formally and urgently addresses the need for clear, enforceable criteria governing its application. Call for the development of minimum standards for institutions engaged in trade under Purpose Code Z. Encourage parties to require supporting documentation or criteria for zoo trade when authorizing trade under Purpose Code Z to prove non-commercial intent unless the facility is an accredited zoo. Endorse a formal review and clarification of how Purpose Code Z has been applied, particularly in relation to recent exports from commercial, non-transparent facilities. Ensure that this review includes the export of species to India and Vantara GZRRC since 2022 as a representative case study to assess how Purpose Code Z is applied in practice. CITES Purpose Code Z was intended to enable the non-commercial movement of specimens for legitimate zoological purposes, including public education, conservation, rescue, or research. While Purpose Code Z is defined in Conference Resolution 12.3, the resolution does not require accreditation, non-commerciality tests, or minimum standards to distinguish legitimate conservation and zoological exchanges from commercial acquisitions. It does not require that the source of the animals be a registered breeder, operate transparently, or have any affiliation with scientific or conservation institutions. As a result, Purpose Code Z has been used to export live endangered species by commercial entities, often with ties to illegal wildlife trade. More evidence related to the Vantana case from data from India, South Africa, Mexico, and UAE is available in the comments that we'll submit in writing. Misuse of Purpose Code Z is in practice a compliance problem under Article 8. When parties authorize Z transactions without verifying non-commercial intent, legal acquisition, or breeding registration status, they fail the Article 8 duties to maintain effective controls, penalize illegal trade, and ensure confiscation. We therefore call for a clear compliance pathway. 1, flag Z anomalies via the Purpose Codes workstream. 2, trigger Secretariat information requests and, where needed, technical missions. 3, escalate to Article 13 if deficiencies persist. And 4, apply scientific committee recommendations up to targeted trade suspensions until corrective measures are in place. COP20 provides a timely opportunity for parties to take leadership in restoring accountability, transparency, and clarity to transactions authorized under Purpose Code Z. 4PAWS stands ready to support the U.S. and other parties and the intersessional working group to help design and implement these much-needed reforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Drew Robertson from the Humane World Action Fund, followed by Robert Likens from the Pet Advocacy Network, and then Danielle Kessler from International Fund for Animal Welfare.
Hello, my name is Drew Robertson. I'm here representing Humane World for Animals and Humane World Action Fund, formerly Humane Society International, Humane Society of the United States, and Humane Society Legislative Fund, respectively. We are very glad U.S. Fish and Wildlife is hosting this in-person public meeting ahead of COP20 and appreciate the opportunity to offer support for the conservation of many species. However, we were dismayed to see Proposal 4, which seeks to delete the giraffe populations of Angola, Botswana, Eswatini, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, and Zimbabwe from Appendix 2. Not only would this be a step backward from the resolution reached at COP18, but it would create significant enforcement problems. Since 2019, tens of thousands of giraffe parts have been traded, bones and bone carvings, skins, skulls, and trophies, in addition to more than 1,000 live animals. The majority of the trade is in bone and skin, items that make it difficult to determine the origin of the piece. But under the split listing scheme proposed, the question of origin bears on the legality of the trade. This patchwork approach is therefore likely to frustrate critical enforcement efforts, a conclusion that U.S. Fish and Wildlife itself reached when it proposed listing the Angolan and South African giraffe subspecies under Section 4E of the Endangered Species Act less than a year ago. We are also concerned that the proposal fails to consider the potential effect of increased trade on small populations. For instance, Malawi's population is estimated to include fewer than 40 giraffes. We hope that the United States will support continued protection for all giraffes currently listed under Appendix 2. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Robert Likens from the Pet Advocacy Network, followed by Danielle Kessler from the International Fund for Animal Welfare, followed by Heather Noonan from League of American Orchestras.
Thank you, and thank you for getting my last name right. Nobody does that. I'm Bob Likens. I'm with the Pet Advocacy Network. David Garcia from USARC has already spoken to the flaws within the proposal on tarantulas, so I just wanted to mention very briefly that the proposal would also have actual adverse effects with regard to conservation. There are several range states that have repopulation programs in place that are partially funded by commercial sales. Mexico is a great example. It has operations called UMAs that raise over 1 million specimens a year to release into the wild. They fund this program by taking 30% of the specimens they raise, selling them commercially so they can release the other 70%. Unfortunately, Mexico is so unpredictable as to the time it takes to get a CITES export permit approved that most of the specimens coming into the U.S. don't come from Mexico, they come from Germany and the Netherlands. The CITES listing actually adversely affects the ability of Mexico to repopulate the tarantulas. So I just wanted to add that as one additional thing with it, and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Danielle Kessler from the International Fund for Animal Welfare, followed by Heather Noonan from League of American Orchestras, followed by Chase Maggiano from Rare Violins of New York.
Good afternoon. My name is Danielle Kessler, and I'm the director of the U.S. Office of the International Fund for Animal Welfare. Thanks for the opportunity today to provide comments and input as you prepare for this 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. I'm speaking today on behalf of IFA and our more than 1 million U.S. supporters. We're a global conservation organization with offices in 15 countries around the globe and projects in more than 40. My comments today are not comprehensive of IFA's recommendations or positions, as we are also still reviewing proposals and priorities, and will follow up with written comments. Today, I would like to focus on our support for Proposal 19 to include Hispaniolan giant galley wasp in Appendix 1, Proposal 20 to include the Mount Elliott leaf-tailed gecko in Appendix 2, Proposal 21 to include the ring fin-tailed gecko in Appendix 2, Proposal 22 to transfer the Galapagos marine iguana from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1, and Proposal 23 to transfer the Galapagos land iguana from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. IFA generally supports any country proposing to list its own endemic species if it deems necessary to do so to meet its own goals for management and conservation. We would hope that if the U.S. similarly found its endemic species in illegal trade in a foreign country, that CITES parties would support efforts to rectify illegal taking of our species. In particular, these proposals include species present in allegedly captive trade, though specimens have never legally been exported from their countries of origin. This highlights the problem of illegally sourced wildlife being laundered into legal trade, and in some cases with CITES permitting. To that end, we also support Document 73 on trade in threatened endemic species, which calls on parties to consult with the country of origin when trading an endemic species and directs the Secretariat to conduct a study on trade. I'd also like to express our strong support for Proposal 11 to include C. hoffmanni and C. didactylus sloths in Appendix 2. IFA remains deeply concerned about the burgeoning popularity of sloths and associated trade to fill demand for encounters and interactions in the U.S. Just last week, we were made aware of 2 live sloths contained in cages in an SUV and being offered for interactions in the parking lot of a travel convenience store. A Google search produces multiple pages of results of sloth interactions, including recently opened and coming soon encounters. Analysis of Limas data provided by the Sloth Institute for the period from 2012 to 2021 showed that 1,082 live sloths were imported, of which 97% were C. didactylus. As cited in Proposal 11, the Limas database reported 1,490 imports of live C. didactylus, with inclusion of an additional 2-year time period from 2022 to 2023. Assuming that there is an overlap of these data sets, more than 400 live sloths would have been imported in a recent 2-year period. We recognize the assumptions made in comparing these data sets and do so only to ask the U.S. to closely examine the Limas data related to sloth trade and recent trends. As with most sloth life history traits, reproduction is slow, and successful reproduction in captivity is rare. This is a trait that will continue to need to source from the wild and must be monitored to ensure that it will not be detrimental to wild populations. Thank you for your time and consideration of these comments. We look forward to working with you as you prepare for COP.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Heather Noonan from League of American Orchestras, followed by Chase Maggiano from Rare Violins of New York, followed by Jeremy Clare from Safari Club International.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Heather Noonan, and I'm offering comments on behalf of the League of American Orchestras, the national service organization for approximately 2,200 orchestras across the United States, including professional orchestras, community orchestras, and youth ensembles that tour the globe. We are an active participant in the wider music sector, partnering with the American Federation of Musicians of the United States and Canada, the American Federation of Violin and Bow Makers, the National Association of Music Merchants, Carnegie Hall, and a wide range of music stakeholders advancing compliance with international rules for travel and commerce with musical instruments that contain protected species materials. Musical instruments have a long lifespan, are in use and resold over many years, are an essential tool of the trade for the professionals that play them across all musical genres, and are frequently transported internationally for performances. We're fully committed to the goals of conservation and combating illegal trade in protected species. Under separate comments, our organizations and several other music stakeholders have described the essential nature of U.S. participation in CITES. The United States has been a leading voice for common sense solutions that improve opportunities for musicians to engage in travel and trade with their professional and highly valuable tools. Several proposals under consideration at the 20th Conference of the Parties will impact musical activity. We ask the U.S. representatives to consider the following 3 specific actions. Species proposals for COP20 include a proposal by Brazil that would list Pau Brasilia echinata, Pernambuco, on Appendix 1. The large majority of fine bows in use by professional musicians worldwide are made from Pernambuco wood. The quality of these bows is integral to the quality of music performed for listeners internationally and essential to the progress musicians make in their careers, from advanced students to professionals. The Pernambuco proposal underestimates the impact of an Appendix 1 listing, which would impose massive new permit requirements for traveling stringed musicians and curtail the sale, resale, and repair of new and very many existing bows made over the course of over 200 years, well before the trees came under protected status. On average, a single touring orchestra will travel with more than 70 bows for stringed instruments. CITES permits for simply traveling with a musical instrument are exceedingly difficult to use, as they require credentialing at a limited number of qualified U.S. ports, and opportunities to have them recognized in other countries are extremely difficult due to a lack of harmonization. Requiring permits for every border crossing will harm musicians while also creating a massive new permit and enforcement burden for officials. Restricting future sales of existing and legally crafted bows will financially impact many musicians that invested in the quality of their playing and their career. Musicians, bow makers, performing arts organizations, and listening audiences value the Pernambuco tree as a uniquely essential resource for both stringed music and the environmental ecosystem of Brazil. Together with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we have implemented compliance training efforts and have launched a campaign called Know Your Bow to bring awareness to musicians across the globe, including music stakeholders within Brazil. Music stakeholders urge the U.S. to take actions at COP20 to support the solutions available under the Appendix 2 listing, including full implementation of the decisions agreed at COP19 that will establish traceability systems for newly made bows, support plantation-grown trees as a sustainable source for the future, and continue full protections for wild-grown trees. Next, we recognize with gratitude that the U.S. was a global leader in securing amendments to Annotation 15 for rosewood at the COP18 that resulted in solutions for both commercial and non-commercial trade of musical instruments made from various species of rosewood by creating an exemption for finished musical instruments, parts, and accessories. The COP20 discussion of annotations under Doc 103, and specifically Annotation 15 under Doc 104, reinforce the effectiveness of those exemptions and support the broader principle that annotations for plants should focus on commodities that first enter trade from range states and primarily drive demand for the wild resource. We seek support from the U.S. to engage and plan next steps about wider traceability efforts, and musical instrument stakeholders will also again be offering to participate in the annotations working group. Finally, for musicians and ensembles that travel with CITES musical instrument certificates, which was created by a U.S. proposal adopted at COP16, practical barriers and financial obstacles related to navigating the required port inspection and credentialing procedures have impeded international cultural activity and in some cases left musicians with no choice but to leave their best instruments at home. For procedural issues under consideration at COP20, we ask the U.S. to once again take a leadership role and expand the mandate for future work on simplified procedures for the rapid movement of musical instruments during consideration of Doc 61, and support the mandate for consideration of musical instruments and next steps on e-permitting under Doc 56.1. The League of American Orchestras is partnering with other music stakeholders on comprehensive comments for the record, and we look forward to continued collaboration with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in developing technical assistance that helps with compliance with both CITES rules and U.S. domestic policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Chase Maggiano from Rare Violins of New York, followed by Jeremy Clare from Safari Club International, followed by Taylor Tench from Environmental Investigation Agency.
Good afternoon. My name is Chase Maggiano. I do work at Rare Violins of New York. I am here representing the International Alliance of Violin and Bow Makers for Endangered Species as a board member. Though I do need to clarify, I'm not a bow maker myself. My profession is a bow restorer. I repair and restore mostly antique bows for violin, viola, cello, and bass, rather than making new bows. I was previously a freelance violinist, and I grew to understand how supremely important the bow is to a musician's playing, so I decided to make it my career to keep the bows healthy. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my perspective on the significance of Pau Brasilia Echinata, or Pernambuco, as I'll call it, to the world of music. A few points I would like to make today. The first is that the International Alliance and the musician community absolutely oppose the illegal harvesting of Pernambuco. There just is no need for wild populations of Pernambuco trees to be harvested for new bow making. Bow makers have an adequate supply of global wood for the next several years, and thanks to conservation efforts and replanting that have been underway for more than a quarter century, there are estimated to be millions of trees growing today on agroforestry plantations. These trees are actively restoring landscapes and can more than meet the very modest needs of the music sector. For instance, a single bow maker might use one fully grown tree in their entire career. So I'm not actually here today to talk much about the bow makers, but rather about the musicians who play these bows. Their lives and the entire experience of listening to music will be completely upended from an Appendix 1 listing. Many people might think that the violin is the main thing, but actually the bow is the starting point of the sound. You'll hear what I mean in a minute. For professional players, a Pernambuco bow is such an essential tool of their trade that they will often invest their life savings or even take a second mortgage to obtain an instrument to help advance their career. I see this all the time. Bow makers, restorers, and musicians have been investing not only in the bows, but also in the conservation and scientific understanding to sustainably use Pernambuco. And we've been doing this since we first became aware that the species was endangered. We did so because the Pernambuco tree is iconic, not only as a national symbol of Brazil, but also as the wood that, like no other, gives voice to stringed instruments. It is not surprising to learn that the trade of Pernambuco is global. My clients come to my shop from around the world because each bow has its own character and expressive qualities, so the players will travel globally to buy a bow from one of the world's approximately 400 artisanal makers, or to have their bows restored by someone like me. An Appendix 1 listing would make the creation, the trade, and the use of Pernambuco wood bows virtually impossible worldwide. That means that when musicians from the National Symphony or the New York Philharmonic or the U.S. Army Orchestra's Pershing's Own, when they tour other countries, they'll be forced to use alternative material bows, often carbon fiber, which, again, in a minute you'll hear, will greatly hurt the experience of live music and hurt our cultural reputation. Stringed instrument music as we know it and the 240-year-old tradition of bow making would be forever changed. So that's a lot, and I'm often asked why Pernambuco is irreplaceable, why it's essential to making music from these things. The answer was discovered about 240 years ago by a French bow maker named François Xavier Tort. Through experimentation and working with musicians throughout his entire career, he and other bow makers discovered that Pernambuco, above all other woods available, has the ideal combination of strength, density, and resonance to enable musicians to make the most beautiful sounds, closer to our own human voice than anything else. The technicality of it is that the speed of sound through the Pernambuco wood gives it unparalleled resonance. And the Pernambuco wood's unique cell structure actually gives it a flexibility to do all the bouncing and the long notes and everything in between that you need to make music for anything from Bach to fiddle music. Nothing has ever come close to improving on what Tort discovered, and Pernambuco remains without equal. That is why advanced players throughout the world, whether a young cellist auditioning to go to Juilliard, or a fiddle player, or a bluegrass musician, or a jazz bassist, or someone like Yo-Yo Ma, they all require the distinctive qualities of Pernambuco wood bows. So here's the fun part, I hope. With your indulgence, I would like to briefly demonstrate the effect of an Appendix 1 listing. I've brought with me a violin that is typical of the kind of instrument that a conservatory student or an early career professional might play. And I've also brought an old Pernambuco bow, as well as an alternative material carbon fiber bow. Carbon fiber is typically what a player would use when they're not able to use a Pernambuco bow. It's super common in our industry. The makers and musicians have, as I said, for hundreds of years tried to find alternatives, both unnatural and other alternative woods, and they simply don't match up. I think you'll hear that real Pernambuco versus an alternative bow has much more resonance, much more color, and it might even sound louder because that speed of sound, it actually spins more. When you think of like the heartstrings that you hear from violin music in a movie or something like that, those heartstrings that get pulled, that's actually the tone and the color, not necessarily just the notes or the person playing. So I'll demonstrate a few things and then give you, if you don't mind, just a small little performance. No, I won't. Just a scale. Took a risk. Are we hearing anything? I see a lot of heads nodding. Okay. If you don't mind, I'll play just a little bit of one of my favorite pieces on the real Pernambuco bow.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Next, we have Jeremy Clare from Safari Club International, followed by Taylor Tench from Environmental Investigation Agency, and finally John Bennett from the American Federation of Violin and Bowmakers.
Good afternoon. I'm not sure it really matters what I say after that, so appreciate having to follow that. So thanks for having this public hearing today. First, I'll just start off by giving thanks to the U.S. For being a proponent in only 4 proposals and not inundating the COP agenda with too many proposals. As we've seen time and time again, there's never enough time to fully and robustly consider all of the agenda items at the COPs. And so whatever the United States and the other parties can do to really focus in on the species that need consideration and the agenda items that need to be discussed, we certainly encourage that, and we encourage the U.S. to keep their focus on the proper implementation of the convention's mandate. In terms of the proposals, we support Proposal 1 on Bontebuk and encourage the U.S. to do so as well, to delete it from Appendix 2. The species has made a remarkable recovery, as the service knows, from a population size of around 17 individuals in the 1930s to an estimated or more than 10,000 individuals today. There are sufficient safeguards in place now that in the form of a national and provincial legislation, a robust permitting system, and a nationally implemented management plan to ensure that deletion from Appendix 2 will not lead to over-exploitation or detrimental trade. We support Proposal 4 on southern giraffe to delete the populations of the southern African range states, or the range states for the southern giraffe, which is now a widely recognized separate species of giraffe from 3 other species of giraffe. And really this proposal, in our mind, kind of brings CITES up to that recognition of the 4 separate species and recognizes that the southern giraffe probably should never have been listed on Appendix 2 in the first place. Habitat for southern giraffe is stable and to increasing across all southern African range states, and in South Africa in particular, increase in private ownership of giraffes and the economic interest in conserving a thriving population has significantly increased available habitat. And there are sufficient domestic measures in place across the southern giraffe's range states to regulate offtake and ensure trade sustainability. We encourage the United States to oppose Proposal 6 on striped hyena, which would include it in Appendix 1. The primary threats to the striped hyena include habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict, direct persecution, and illegal domestic trade. You'll note I did not include international trade, either legal or illegal, as a notable threat to the species. And so a CITES Appendix 1 listing would not address the primary concerns for the species, and nor does the species meet the biological criteria for inclusion in Appendix 1. We support Proposal 9 on southern white rhino that would amend the annotation for the population of Namibia's southern white rhino. When the parties considered the biological criteria for inclusion in Appendix 1 for Namibia's southern white rhino at COP19, they actually came to the conclusion that the criteria for Appendix 1 were not met, and they didn't consider Namibia's southern white rhino population to be small, to have a restricted range, or to be in decline. So really it should be on Appendix 2 in the first place, but I think we all realize that the concern here is commercial trade in rhino horn. And so if there is a concern from the parties and they don't support Proposal 9 because it would allow for commercial trade in rhino horn, we would encourage the U.S. to both suggest and or support an amendment to the proposal that would amend the annotation to include trade and hunting trophies in Appendix 2. Similarly, for Proposal 14, that's the proposal from that was the product of the CITES dialogue meeting for African elephant range states. We encourage the U.S. to support that proposal. Frankly, it doesn't relate to SCI's interest, but it does. We do encourage all parties to welcome the consensus achieved at that dialogue meeting. And the amendments proposed would harmonize and simplify the annotation for African elephant populations. And then finally, just again, I want to thank the United States for Proposal 17 on peregrine falcon. We certainly support that one, and would hope that all the parties would support transferring the species from Appendix 1 to Appendix 2, and really recognize the successful recovery of the species, reinforce CITES credibility, and strengthen trust in CITES as a science-based convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Taylor Tench from Environmental Investigation Agency, followed by John Bennett from the American Federation of Violin and Bowmakers.
Hello, and thank you very much for hosting this meeting today. My name is Taylor Tench with the Environmental Investigation Agency. Just to preface, we'll submit extended comments in writing, and today I'll focus on a couple of the listing proposals and then switch over to a few of the agenda item documents. I'll start with Proposal 3 on saiga antelope. The recovery of the saiga population in Kazakhstan is a welcome conservation good news story, and Kazakhstan should be commended for its efforts in this regard. However, while the majority of saiga are located in Kazakhstan, allowing international commercial trade in horn from Kazakhstan would impact other range states' populations, including those that have not enjoyed the impressive saiga population rebound of Kazakhstan. This would include impacts on law enforcement, poaching, and trafficking of other range state populations, as well as potential illegal trade of saiga from Kazakhstan through these other range state territories. Important consumer countries have been unwilling or unable to share information on the number and volume of saiga horn kept in stockpiles. And without this information, and given regular reports of illegal trade, there's a significant risk that legal saiga horn exports could facilitate the laundering of poached and/or illegally exported saiga horn into consumer markets. So we would therefore urge the U.S. to oppose this proposal. Moving on to the two rhino proposals, I'll address them both together, Proposals 9 and 10. From Namibia, rhino populations globally remain at risk from poaching and illegal trade, as I think we all know, and Namibia in particular continues to experience high levels of poaching. Rhino poaching increased by nearly 8% in the country in 2024 over 2023, while its black rhino population declined by more than 4% from 2022 to 2024 to fewer than 2,100 individuals. Proposals 9 and 10, which aim to allow for commercial international trade in rhino horn, would trigger increased demand, poaching, and illegal trade. The proposal fails to acknowledge that such risks would not be limited just to Namibia's rhino populations and would instead impact rhino populations across Africa and Asia. The proponents' estimates of current and future demand appear to be based on illegal trade data, which is not an appropriate proxy for estimating levels of potential legal trade and fails to account for the risk of demand increasing exponentially if commercial trade is legalized. Moreover, rhino horn trade is illegal in end-use countries such as China and Vietnam, and there's therefore no apparent viable prospective trading partner to begin with. Claims that demand reduction campaigns have, quote, largely failed, ignore notable downward poaching trends in many range states and the impacts of improved enforcement in end-use countries. The proposal would also undermine a number of demand reduction initiatives endorsed by CITES parties, including in the Rhino Resolution. The proposed pilot frameworks to limit sales of white rhino horn to 200 kilograms and a one-off sale of more than 4.6 tons of black rhino horn fail to address the core risks with legalizing horn trade and ignore the lessons from the 2008 ivory one-off sale and its impact on demand for ivory and elephant poaching. So we would again urge the U.S. to oppose Proposals 9 and 10. Lastly, on the proposals for African elephant, we would strongly urge the U.S. to oppose this proposal. Permitting commercial ivory trade would undermine many years of efforts to close or regulate domestic ivory markets, as well as to reduce demand and improve enforcement. Ivory poaching continues to be a major threat to African elephants, and the proposal ignores the immediate risk of increased poaching that would be very likely following any reopening of international ivory trade. It also fails to address the broader continent-wide consequences similar to the rhino proposals and increased enforcement burdens across source, transit, and consumer countries. So again, we'll submit more detailed comments in writing, but we would urge the U.S. to oppose this proposal. Switching over to a few of the agenda items, firstly with agenda item document 84 on rhinos. Doc 84 and the accompanying Annex 3, which contains the IUCN Traffic, Rhino Conservation, and Trade Report, contains a wealth of information and analysis. We welcome this report, as well as the outcomes of the CITES Rhino Enforcement Task Force meeting, which took place in South Africa in May of this year. What this report makes crystal clear is that organized criminal networks that control the poaching and trafficking continue to pose major threats to African and Asian rhinos, with downturns in white rhino populations down to the lowest level we've seen since the current poaching crisis began in the early 2000s. China remains a critical end-use market for the horn, and Vietnam and other countries in Southeast Asia, such as Laos, continue to be exploited as trafficking hubs. There's a lot more I'm going to say. There's a almost 100-page report annexed to this document, but really, as now, just as in the meetings, there's not enough time to really go through all this information. Of those 100 pages of data, only one country-specific draft recommendation was proposed for Indonesia. And given the jam-packed agendas of the CITES COPs, of the standing committees, and how, unfortunately, rhino agenda items like others have only received cursory attention due to time constraints, we would really urge the U.S. to propose a decision to establish an intersessional working group that would allow parties to really dive into the data, the details, propose targeted decisions, have robust debate, and really treat this issue with the seriousness and time it deserves. Quickly on a few elephant documents, Doc 35.2 on NIAPs. Just quickly would like to encourage the U.S. to support the recommendations in Doc 35.2, in particular the call for further amendments to the NIAP process to be submitted ahead of COP21. And we thank the U.S. for calling for the NIAP review alongside Malawi and Senegal at COP19. On document 76.1, just drawing attention to recommendations K and L relating to decisions affecting trade in Asian elephants. In terms of recommendation K, we would urge the U.S. to support the adoption of new decisions presented in Annex 6 and renew paragraphs A and E. And a few more technical things that are probably better to communicate in writing. Moving on to 76.2, domestic ivory markets, we would urge the U.S. to support the recommendations and draft decisions in this document, which was submitted by several elephant range states, including Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Niger, and Senegal. The document contains an analysis of implementation of a few decisions relating to how parties are taking measures to ensure their ivory markets don't contribute to poaching or illegal trade, and uses analysis from the newly released CITES online data aggregates to help provide some additional information to supplement policy actions some countries have taken. And there are a few recommended decisions, including for Japan, New Zealand, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And specifically related to the draft decision to Japan, we would really urge the U.S. to support this. EIA and other civil society organizations have repeatedly documented how Japan's domestic ivory market contributes to the illegal international ivory trade, and the CITES data highlighted in Doc 76.2 further describes the illegal trade in ivory linked to Japan. So again, we would urge the U.S. to support those recommendations, and we'll submit our full list of comments in writing. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll have John Bennett from American Federation of Violin and Bowmakers.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is John Bennett. I'm representing the American Federation of Violin and Bowmakers, the International Society of Violin and Bowmakers, and the International Pernambuco Conservation Initiative. I'd like to align myself with the comments made earlier by Heather Noonan and Chase Maggiano. I want to also thank the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for hosting today's forum and for the invaluable and irreplaceable role you've been playing for U.S. stakeholders in trade matters before CITES over the years. Our entire sector is grateful for the expertise and the pragmatism the U.S. government has brought to issues affecting the music sector. The United States is the proud home of some of the world's finest bowmaking and stringed instrument music. Bows made of pau brasileira, echinata, or Pernambuco enable stringed instrument musicians to achieve the highest levels of precision, projection, and tone, as Chase Maggiano beautifully demonstrated. That is why, for nearly 250 years, Pernambuco bows have been used by virtually every high-level stringed instrument musician, from advanced students to members of the world's greatest orchestras and bands. To safeguard this extraordinary species, bow makers formed the International Pernambuco Conservation Initiative in 2000, and have since that time invested in science, conservation, and the planting of over 340,000 seedlings in cooperation with Brazilian governmental and environmental counterparts. We've reviewed Brazil's COP20 Prop 46, which proposes that CITES parties list Pau Brasileia echinata on Appendix 1, and we're urging the United States to oppose it. The music sector condemns the illegal harvesting and trafficking of Pernambuco, and we applaud Brazil's enforcement actions. Illegal trafficking poses an existential threat to the tree that gives life to the centuries-old tradition of stringed instrument music, and to the many musicians around the world who depend on the legal use of Pernambuco bows for their livelihoods. An Appendix 1 listing, however, would not help to conserve Pernambuco, would impose very heavy burdens on CITES authorities and end users, and would have catastrophic consequences for music. Each and every music movement of the many tens of thousands of Pernambuco bows transported across borders for performances by musicians worldwide would become subject to extremely challenging permitting requirements and credentialing at ports worldwide. The administrative burden on CITES and customs officials worldwide would compromise their ability to address permit requests and monitor cross-border movements efficiently. The overwhelming majority of specimens and bows in existence throughout the world were acquired during a period of more than 200 years prior to 2007, when the species was first listed on Appendix 2. Because the impacts of an Appendix 1 listing would fall on bows that have already been in trade for years, the benefits to conservation of the species are not apparent. And because the wood and sticks seized by Brazil during its investigations were already subject to Appendix 2 permit requirements, and all exports from Brazil are now subject to both domestic and CITES permit requirements, it's hard to see how an Appendix 1 listing would serve as an effective enforcement mechanism for any illegally harvested wood in Brazil, the species' only range state. Musicians, orchestras, and artisanal makers of bows depend on the ability to buy, sell, and repair the bows they rely on as the tools of their trade. An Appendix 1 listing would make trade virtually impossible, and the long cultural tradition of bow making would itself face extinction. As a result, the entire world of stringed instrument music, the cultures that have developed around this music, the many ancillary businesses who depend on it for their livelihoods, and the daily pleasures of all who enjoy music would be dramatically and needlessly undermined. We believe there's a better way. At COP19, the parties agreed to amend Annotation 10 and to a set of decisions designed to strengthen implementation of Pernambuco's Appendix 2 listing. During SC 78, the Standing Committee proposed new draft decisions that would sustain and extend the work begun in Panama. This pathway includes increasing the awareness of global parties so that they carefully examine any exports out of Brazil and ensure that they are accompanied by valid CITES permits, promoting the voluntary registration of Pernambuco stocks and the establishment of a global traceability system for newly made bows, and developing the management and regulatory tools to enable the sustainable use of existing and future plantation-grown wood, which in turn will help to conserve the species, sustain livelihoods for local farmers, and with traceability, create a verifiably legal supply of wood for the creation of bows. By continuing forward on this path and using the flexible tools available under Appendix 2, we're confident that a solution can be achieved that would strengthen legal compliance, conserve the species, sustain livelihoods, and preserve global musical and cultural traditions that are essential to the human experience. We welcome dialogue with U.S. authorities, the Brazilian government, CITES delegations, as well as environmental, cultural, and all other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for providing those comments. I will now turn to Heidi if there are any additional comments.
Testing this microphone. Yes, it works. Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone who provided comments so far. We know there were several who indicated undecided, and so we'd like to now open up the floor to anyone else who might like to provide comments today, whether you declared undecided or not. We'll just ask people to line up behind this microphone here, and we'll ask you to please clearly state your name and organization before you start providing your comments. Thank you so much.
Hello there. Somehow I didn't make it on the list. But my name is Ashley Amadon, and I am the CEO of the International Wood Products Association. IWPA appreciates the opportunity to inform development of the Fish and Wildlife Service's negotiating positions at the upcoming CITES Conference of the Parties. IWPA, if you're not already familiar, is the leading trade association for the North American international wood products industry. We advocate for the growth and acceptance of responsible, ethical, and sustainable wood products sourced globally, while supporting communities, trade, and consumers. IWPA is committed to working with the United States government and key stakeholders to promote responsible trade in CITES regulated wood products. We strongly support the goals of CITES, namely to ensure that international trade in specimens of wild animals and plants do not threaten their survival. We also continue to call on the United States government and other CITES parties to administer the convention in a manner that is more responsive to the needs of United States companies sourcing regulated wood products. IWPA encourages Fish and Wildlife Service to focus on ensuring the United States companies and manufacturers can continue doing business and supporting their employees while upholding sustainable environmental practices. As the administration continues its review of participation in all international organizations and treaties, we are concerned that any decision to withdraw from the convention will negatively impact United States companies that trade in or use CITES regulated wood products. These products are used throughout the United States in industries as diverse as home building and remodeling, as we've heard, musical instrument manufacturing and repair, and artisanal woodworking. If the United States were to withdraw from the convention, it would negatively impact stakeholders in our industry by introducing a level of uncertainty about when and whether permits are necessary for both imports and exports. We are also concerned whether other parties will impose stricter domestic measures, which are allowed under the convention, or even choose not to accept United States exports of CITES regulated products as a non-party. This uncertainty will lead to costly entry delays at ports and will harm domestic production by introducing significant compliance risks for exporters. The United States would also lose its ability to seek workable solutions for our industry as a participant at CITES meetings, leading other nations to take charge of what species are regulated, including those found in the United States. As the United States government prepares to participate at COP20, IWPA urges that several core principles should be followed, namely, 1, reliance on science-based decision-making, 2, assurance that any new listings can be effectively implemented, 3, proper deference to the experience and expertise of range state parties, 4, regulation of a commodity as it first appears in international trade as an export from range states, and 5, assurance that there is sufficient time to implement any new listing. We believe that modernization of the system is crucial to ensuring efficient trade and robust compliance, and therefore strongly encourage that Fish and Wildlife work with other parties on a universal electronic permit system. Electronic permitting will help streamline the process of acquiring, using, and invalidating CITES permits. The current paper-based system is rife with inefficiencies, such as lost or stolen permits and long delays in transmitting physical documents. Movement to a universally accepted electronic system would allow permits to be applied for, issued, transmitted, and verified instantaneously. Additionally, real-time electronic transmission of CITES documents would allow permits to be verified as goods are shipped, preventing costly delays that now happen when documents are verified only once a shipment is received at the port of entry. IWPA encourages the United States to work closely with other parties to promote policies that preserve the level of trade in timber species that is not detrimental to the health of the species in question. Overexploitation of the most desirable timber species is harmful to the global wood products industry as it undermines the long-term health of forests and imperils the livelihoods of communities that are supported by jobs in the forest products industry worldwide and here in the United States. Listings that are not critical to survival of the species only increase the burden on management and scientific authorities in a manner that can result in delays to industry members seeking permits, including for re-export of previously permitted goods. IWPA has heard from multiple members of our industry that they have decided to no longer re-export CITES-regulated goods from the United States because of the persistent delays in permit issuance. For this reason, the United States should support proposals to delist several African species that are not threatened by trade, such as Afzalia bipendensis and Pterocarpus soyoxi. Responsible trade is critical to ensuring that global producers, as well as the United States consumers of these products, understand the value of CITES-listed species and the role they play in supporting communities that rely on a vibrant forest economy. IWPA looks forward to working closely with Fish and Wildlife staff to advance these principles and are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Craig Hoover. I'm with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And first of all, thank you for continuing to have such a robust and transparent consultation process with the public. That is much appreciated. We will provide more fulsome comments on the larger agenda in writing, but I wanted to focus on what is perhaps the biggest conservation issue of our time, and that is obviously document 55 on purpose of transaction codes. The U.S. has long demonstrated leadership on this topic. The U.S. has chaired working groups, intersessional working groups, in-session working groups for many, many years. Work on this topic has been plodding, it has been slow, and it's been incredibly important. And I would just echo the remarks that we made at the most recent standing committee meeting and that the U.S. made from the floor at the standing committee meeting, and that is recognition that the definition of Purpose Code Z was laboriously developed and unanimously agreed. It is the most recent definition of a purpose of transaction code that we have, and we don't disagree with our colleagues at FORPAWS that there is misuse of this purpose code. And the point there is that it's an implementation problem, it's not a definition problem. And we're not going to define our way out of countries failing to properly implement the convention. We would urge the U.S. to restate its view that further efforts on purpose of transaction codes be focused on those that have not yet been defined, and particularly on purpose codes B, P, and S. And that reopening Purpose Code Z is not only unnecessary, it delays discussion on definitions of currently undefined purpose codes that really urgently need the parties' attention. Thank you.
Thanks.
Apologies for taking the floor one more time. I just wanted to align myself with what IWPA said about CITES being important for the U.S. and urging the U.S. not to withdraw from CITES. I looked at the CITES website yesterday and noticed that the USA is listed under the list of currently unpaid contributions, and also that the U.S. has not contributed towards the sponsored delegates project for COP20. So I just wanted to also stress the importance of the U.S. Staying in CITES and contributing to this important convention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas Albert on behalf of the Zoological Association of America. Actually, I can be short and sweet. I want to echo the comments of Craig Hoover. I would like to know how he read my notes from 3 rows in front of me, because he used the exact verbiage that I was going to use. Misuse is not a definition problem, it's an implementation problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Heidi again.
So we do have more time if anyone else is interested in coming up and making comments. Now is the time. Give it another moment for folks to decide. And if not, last chance, going on? Okay. Then I'll turn it back over to our director to say some concluding remarks. And thank you again all for coming.
Yes, this concludes the public meeting, and I did want to say thank you for those that came and provided thoughtful comments, thorough comments, and were respectful of other people's time. I will tell you that I've presided over hundreds of public meetings, and I've never had one evolve into a concert, so I will remember this one. Thank you.